Feminism is the single most harmful force against women in our recorded history, yet you would not know it from the women themselves. While the short-term benefits of feminism have sedated the masses of women, the long-term effects will render them entirely useless, damaged, and unstable as a demographic. The women may exert their influence in democratic countries to mitigate some of the damage, but the damage is permanent. The result is a portion of men who have been freed from their traditional gender roles and cannot be ruled by any woman, government, or institution. Women entering the workforce was the greatest thing to happen to the individual, free-thinking man, and the worst thing to happen to any society that allowed it to happen. As an individual man, he became free from having to work to sustain an entire family. Now the woman could contribute as well, and should she desire to stay at home, the flooding of wage slaves would make it nearly impossible for a middle to lower class woman to stay home. This dependency on her spouse for income, despite having her own income, would often leave her confused because of the conflicting propaganda she would absorb from her television about liberation and choice, when in reality she was lessening the load on the man. The man could still be working grueling hours, but it was not as bad as in other economically strained times in history where the man was the sole breadwinner. The men who reap the most from this economic liberation are the bachelors. An enlightened man can have the women of today entertain him and pay for themselves, something unheard of in older times. He who knows the system can take advantage of it, and these men prosper in their own ways today. Even if a bachelor should abstain from the distractions of women, he is still fortunate to be a part of this economic liberation. In older societies, a man would have to be wedded and a family man to advance in certain careers and corporations, as bachelors were often treated with suspicion and caution. With the sexual liberation of today, a man can provide exactly as much as he desires for himself, with no commitments that he does not want to make. The process of removing social stigmas and shaming tactics for women's sexual behavior enabled the crafty men to take advantage of the newly liberated women. You can do things to the women around you that men used to go to war for the opportunity to do. The men who have been gated out of the sexual revolution would not have been able to thrive in any system that did not explicitly stack the deck in their favor. These are the men who would have benefited from the time when all you needed was a steady job to obtain a wife and start a family. Under this system, these men would have no reason to improve or challenge themselves, only needing to work for another man and bring home a wage for the wife. The sexual revolution is a return to form for the species, one of primal lust and animalistic urges. By removing the restraints on women, the men who push themselves to new heights can reap women, and the men who see its futility can walk their own path. Both types being liberated from the dreary routine of nuclear families and white picket fences. A man can always adapt to his surroundings. Once he learns the rules that are obstructed by his society, he can turn any situation into his favor. Many men desire to have the dreary routine of nuclear families and to maintain their white picket fences on weekends. But now that the possibility of a typical prescribed lifestyle has been removed, these men are now forced to forge their own path. No one can dictate these men because they are unable to fulfill their biological programming of providing shelter and security. Instead, these men typically fall into three categories: adapting and improving their bodies, careers and charisma, and enjoying their hedonistic lifestyle, leaving the traditional path and finding a higher sense of meaning beyond the physical realm, or wallowing in their self-pity and accepting that they are not fit for this primal way of life. Men are empowered by the degeneracy that women have unleashed upon society. Regardless of which category they fall into, men awaken to the reality around them are unable to return to the fantasy that controlled their lives before. A weight has been lifted from their shoulders, and they are now free to decide their fate. The men who suffer under this way of life are those playing by the old rules. It is unfortunate that these men must suffer. The pain is the most effective teacher, and should they survive their torment, they should be able to take lessons from their experiences and move closer to awakening from their artificial slumber. The men who lament the state of society and its reckless women have yet to find a cause that supersedes the women they yearn for. Should society revert to respecting reason and responsibility tomorrow, these men would be the first to engage in the old traditions of courting and marriage, proof that these men do not want to change themselves, but would rather everyone around them change to conform to their expectations. An empowered man reliant on himself is the most powerful force on this planet, stronger than any force of nature. When his shackles are shattered and his hands freed to craft his own destiny, he can choose exactly what future he wants to mold. Feminism has revealed the true nature of women. that has been lost from ancient wisdom, and the degeneracy has become so widespread that the fall of women will never be forgotten, as it cannot be contained. No amount of censorship will erase the pain from men's hearts or the loneliness of the women who sold their souls for pleasure and prosperity. Any sane and rational man can see this way of life is unsustainable, but that same man also has to come to terms with the severity of the problem. Solutions exist, but those solutions are impractical and cannot be enacted. No woman would vote against her own interest, and should the idea of restricting women's rights enter mainstream discussion, a rational man should know that the end of his society is upon him. This is what happens when people who take more than they contribute are given the right to vote. Many great men of history warned of this, but ancient wisdom is rarely applied because each generation believes it is more enlightened than the last. When the system crumbles and society is in ruins, it will be the men who rebuild it. The deciding factor of the sustainability of that new society built upon the ruins of the old is if the enlightened men choose to contribute or not. An enlightened man knows that even if he exerted his mastery over his domain, it would eventually succumb to weakness and decadence once he passed. And this sense of futility is a crippling adversary to productivity. With knowledge comes pain, and in this age of information, men are in more spiritual, emotional, and mental pain than ever. Convincing them to rebuild will be the greatest challenge of those who help destroy society and liberate the men to begin with.
Hey you, yeah you. Do you find yourself bored at work or school? Do you want a direct line of communication to Triple H and other cool MGTOW dudes? Then join the Discord server, silly. Think of it like a big group text chat with over 600 people already. There's also voice chat, and we have one of the best collections of sweet anime titties on the internet, with new 2D babes every day. Not to mention the dank memes channel, 420 Blaze It Boy. It's free, download it on your phone and click the link in the description of every video so you can get announcements for call-in streams and the wisdom of the worst shit posters I've ever met. See you there.